The story of the Ancestral Puebloans begins in the heart of the American Southwest, in a place of haunting beauty and stark reality. Today, we call it the Four Corners, the only spot in the United States where the borders of Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado meet at a single point. But 1,000 years ago, there were no state lines. There was only the vast, red-earthed kingdom of the wind and the sun. This region is part of the Colorado Plateau, a massive upland tilted toward the sky. The landscape is defined by two dramatic features, mesas and canyons. A mesa, the Spanish word for table, is a massive flat-topped mountain that rises abruptly from the desert floor. Below these mesas lie deep, winding canyons, carved over millions of years by the patient hands of water and ice. The climate here was a relentless test of human endurance. It is a high desert, meaning the air is thin and the weather is bipolar. During the summer, the sun beats down so fiercely that the sandstone rocks can burn to the touch. In the winter, those same rocks turn into frozen blocks under a blanket of snow. Rain was a rare blessing, not a guarantee. To survive here, you couldn't fight the earth. You had to learn its rhythms. You had to know where the hidden springs seeped through the rock and how to catch every drop of a sudden summer monsoon. A crisis of identity, Anasazi versus Ancestral Puebloans. What did these people call themselves? The truth is, we don't know. They left no written books, only stories etched in stone and clay. In the 19th century, when explorers first stumbled upon the silent stone cities, they asked the local Navajo people who had built them. The Navajo used the word Anasazi. For decades, Anasazi was the standard name in every history book. However, the word carries a complicated weight. In the Navajo language, it can mean ancient enemies or ancient outsiders. To the modern descendants of these builders, the Hopi, Zuni, and Rio Grande Pueblo tribes, this name felt like a slap in the face. They argued that the builders weren't enemies or outsiders, they were their direct ancestors. In a move to honor the living culture, historians and archaeologists officially shifted the name to Ancestral Puebloans. Pueblo is a Spanish word meaning village or people. By calling them Ancestral Puebloans, we acknowledge that this civilization didn't just vanish, it evolved into the vibrant Pueblo cultures that still thrive in the Southwest today. The dawn of the farmers, from nomads to settlers. The Ancestral Puebloans weren't always builders of stone cities. Their journey began nearly 12,000 years ago as nomadic hunters. They were shadows in the landscape, following herds of mammoths and ancient bison, living in temporary brush shelters or shallow caves. The turning point came around 1500 BC with the arrival of a miracle grain from Mexico, maize, corn. Corn changed the DNA of their society. Unlike wild plants, corn required constant attention. You had to plant it, guard it, water it, and wait for the harvest. This corn revolution forced the nomads to stop wandering. They began to realize that the key to the future wasn't in the hunt, but in the soil. This transition from hunters to farmers laid the foundation for everything that was to come. Life underground, the era of the pit house. As they became permanent farmers, they needed real homes. To survive the desert's extreme temperature swings, blistering days, and freezing nights, they looked downward. They invented the pit house. A pit house was a circular or square room dug 3 to 5 feet into the ground. They would then build a framework of logs over the hole and coat it in a thick layer of mud and thatch. Because the earth is a natural insulator, these homes stayed cool in the summer and held the warmth of a central fire in the winter. These underground dwellings were the first sign of a permanent society. Interestingly, the architecture of the pit house eventually evolved into the kiva, the sacred underground ceremonial chamber that remains central to Pueblo religion today. Master weavers, the basket maker identity. The earliest stage of their settled history is often called the basket maker period. At this time, they hadn't yet mastered pottery or metal. Their entire world was held together by the fibers of the desert. Using the tough, stringy leaves of the yucca plant, they wove baskets of incredible complexity. These weren't just simple containers, they were masterpieces of engineering. Some were woven so tightly they could hold water. They even cooked in them. They would fill a basket with water and drop in fire-heated stones until the water boiled. Every basket was a canvas, decorated with intricate black and red geometric designs that told stories of the stars, the mountains, and their spiritual journey. A society led by women, the matrilineal bond. Archaeological evidence and tribal traditions suggest that Ancestral Puebloan society was matrilineal. This means that lineage, heritage, and property were passed down through the mother's side. In these communities, the women were often the owners of the home and the keepers of the hearth.
When a man married, he would leave his own family to live with his wife's clan. This social structure provided a unique kind of stability. While men might be away for weeks hunting or trading, the women maintained the core of the village and the agricultural cycles. This deep-rooted sense of community and family was the social glue that allowed them to flourish in a desert where a single person could never survive alone.
The pottery revolution, from fiber to fire. For centuries, the ancestral Puebloanos were defined by their baskets, but around 700 AD, a new technology arrived that changed their lives forever: pottery. While baskets were great for carrying dry goods, they were difficult to use for long-term water storage or direct cooking over a flame. They discovered that the gray clay found in the canyon floors, when mixed with sand and fired at high temperatures, became as hard as stone. This wasn't just a kitchen upgrade, it was a survival game changer. Cooking. With clay pots, they could simmer beans and corn for hours, making their food more nutritious and easier for children and the elderly to eat. Storage. Sealed pottery protected their precious seed corn from moisture and rodents, allowing them to survive through lean years. Artistry. Their pottery became their canvas. They developed a signature style known as black on white, where they painted intricate, hypnotic geometric patterns, lines, zigzags, and spirals that represented the flow of water and the path of life. Moving up, the end of the pit house. As the population grew, the old way of living underground in pit houses became impractical. The people needed more space, and they needed it fast. They began to experiment with building above ground. Initially, they used jacal construction, a method of weaving sticks together and plastering them with thick mud. But they soon realized that the very stones they walked on were the best building material available. They began to quarry sandstone, shaping the rocks into uniform blocks. This marked the birth of the pueblo, the Spanish word for village. Instead of individual holes in the ground, they built connected rows of rooms. These early pueblos were the first apartment complexes in North America. The architecture of the soul, the evolution of the kiva. Even as the people moved their living quarters above ground, they didn't abandon their subterranean roots. The old pit house evolved into something sacred, the kiva. A kiva was a circular underground chamber used for religious ceremonies, political meetings, and social gatherings. It was the heart of the community. The sipapu. Every kiva had a small hole in the floor called the sipapu. This was a symbolic portal to the underworld, reminding the people that their ancestors had emerged from the earth. The roof of the kiva was flat and level with the ground, serving as a communal plaza where people could walk, dance, and dry their crops. The Three Sisters and agricultural mastery. During this period, the Puebloanos mastered a sophisticated farming technique known as the Three Sisters. They planted corn, beans, and squash together in the same mound. The corn provided a stalk for the beans to climb. The beans fixed nitrogen in the soil, acting as a natural fertilizer. The squash had large leaves that shaded the ground, keeping the moisture in the soil and preventing weeds. This polyculture was an ecological mastery. It allowed them to produce massive amounts of food on very little water, fueling a population boom that would eventually lead to the creation of massive cities like Chaco Canyon. The first social networks. With permanent stone villages and stable food sources, the ancestral Puebloanos began to connect with other tribes across vast distances. They weren't isolated, they were part of a massive trade network. They traded their turquoise, which they mined in the hills of New Mexico, for Macao feathers in copper bells from as far away as Central America. They traded fine pottery for seashells from the Pacific coast. This era was characterized by peace and expansion. The desert was no longer a place of scarcity. It was a place of abundance and connection. The people were no longer just surviving, they were flourishing, setting the stage for their golden age.
The desert roam, the emergence of Chaco. If the earlier periods of ancestral Puebloan history were about survival, the Chaco era was about statement. Around 850 AD, something shifted in the collective consciousness of the people. They moved away from small, scattered villages and began a massive, multi-generational construction project in a remote 9-mile stretch of canyon in what is now northwestern New Mexico, Chaco Canyon. Chaco was an unlikely place for a superpower. It was a high desert wash with erratic water sources, few trees, and extreme temperatures. Yet it became the Rome of the Southwest. It wasn't just a place to live, it was a ceremonial center, a trading hub, and a massive astronomical observatory that organized the lives of tens of thousands of people across a 60,000 square mile region. the Great Houses, engineering the impossible. The most visible legacy of this era is the Great Houses. These were not just houses. They were massive, multi-story masonry complexes that remained the largest buildings in North America until the late 1800s. Pueblo Bonito, the beautiful village. The most famous of these is Pueblo Bonito. Shaped like a massive capital D, it covered nearly 3 acres. At its peak, it stood 5 stories tall and contained over 600 rooms. The Masonry Revolution. The Chacoans developed a unique core and veneer masonry style. The center of the walls consisted of rough stones and mud, while the exterior was covered in meticulously shaped thin slabs of sandstone. This allowed them to build incredibly thick, stable walls that could support the weight of 4 upper floors. The log logistics. Building these massive structures required timber, and lots of it. Estimates suggest that over 200,000 trees, mostly ponderosa pine and spruce, were used in Chaco. The mystery. There were no forests in the canyon. Modern science, dendroprovenance, has proven that these massive logs were carried by hand from the Chusca and San Mateo Mountains, over 50 to 70 miles away. Without wheels, horses, or oxen, thousands of men must have carried these logs on their shoulders across the desert, a feat of organization that rivals the building of the Egyptian pyramids. The master astronomers, mapping the heavens. The Chacoans were obsessed with the sky. They believed that the movements of the sun, moon, and stars were the movements of the gods, and they built their architecture to reflect that divine order. Solar and lunar alignments. The great houses were not placed randomly. They were oriented to mark the solstices and equinoxes. The north-south axis, Pueblo Bonito's main dividing wall, is aligned almost perfectly with true north. The lunar standstill. Some Chacoan buildings track the major lunar standstill, a complex 18.6-year cycle where the moon reaches its northernmost and southernmost points on the horizon. To track this, a culture must keep meticulous records for centuries, proving the Chacoans had an intellectual tradition as advanced as the Greeks or Mayans. The Sundagger. High atop Fajada Butte, 3 large stone slabs were positioned to lean against a cliff face. Behind them, 2 spiral petroglyphs were carved. During the solstices and equinoxes, daggers of light would pass between the rocks and pierce the centers of the spirals at exactly high noon. This was the ultimate desert clock, telling the priests exactly when to begin the ceremonies for planting and harvest. The Chacoan road system, roads to nowhere? Radiating out from Chaco Canyon is a network of over 400 miles of engineered roads. These were not simple footpaths. They were up to 30 feet wide and dug into the caliche soil. The strangest thing about these roads, they are dead straight. If a road encountered a 100-foot cliff, the Chacoans didn't build a switchback to go around it. Instead, they carved massive vertical staircases directly up the rock face to maintain the straight line. Because they had no wheeled vehicles, these roads weren't for commerce in the way we think of it. Many scholars believe they were sacred pilgrimage paths. They connected the outlier communities, hundreds of smaller pueblos across the southwest, to the sacred center of Chaco. The roads were a physical manifestation of their social and religious unity.
The Wall Street of turquoise and macaws. Chaco was the economic engine of the Southwest. Despite its isolation, it was a hub for exotic luxury goods. The turquoise industry. Over 200,000 pieces of turquoise have been excavated from Chaco. It was mined in the Cerrillos Hills and brought to the canyon to be turned into beads and pendants. Turquoise was likely the currency of the era. Tropical imports. Archaeologists have found the remains of scarlet macaws and military macaws in the ruins. These birds were brought alive from the jungles of Mexico, over 1,000 miles away. They also found cylindrical jars containing residues of theobromine, proving that the Chacoan elites were drinking chocolate imported from the tropics. A pilgrimage culture. Who lived in Chaco? For a long time, we thought Chaco was a crowded city. However, modern excavations show a surprising lack of trash and hearths, cooking fires, in many of the great houses. This led to a new theory. Chaco was a ceremonial center. Most of the year, only a small group of priests and caretakers lived in the great houses. But during the great solar and lunar festivals, thousands of people would travel the straight roads from their distant homes. They would fill the plazas of Pueblo Bonito, bringing offerings of turquoise and corn. For a few weeks a year, the canyon would roar with the sound of drums, singing, and dancing, a massive spiritual gathering that kept the world in balance. The social hierarchy, the emergence of elites. During this golden age, we see the first signs of a social class system.
In Pueblo Bonito, a specific room, room 33, was found containing the burials of high-status individuals, surrounded by tens of thousands of turquoise beads and bowls. This suggests that Chaco was ruled by a theocracy, a group of priest kings who held the secrets of the stars and controlled the distribution of food and sacred goods. The beginning of the end. By 1130 AD, the Golden Age faced its first major threat. A massive 50-year drought began to grip the Southwest. The delicate balance of Chaco, dependent on importing food and timber, started to collapse. The people began to lose faith in the leaders who promised that their rituals would bring the rain. The Chacoan system didn't just break, it was abandoned. The people realized that the centralized power of the canyon was no longer working. They began to pack their belongings and move towards the mountains and cliffs, looking for a new way to live. This transition would lead to the most famous era of their history, the Age of the Cliff Dwellers.
The Great Shift, from the valley to the void. Around 1150 AD, as the centralized power of Chaco Canyon began to fade, a dramatic and puzzling shift occurred. Across the Colorado Plateau, and most famously in Mesa Verde, modern-day Colorado, the Ancestral Puebloans abandoned their expansive valley floor villages. They didn't move far, but they moved up. They began building their homes in the massive, natural sandstone alcoves tucked beneath the overhanging lips of canyon rims. This era, known as the Pueblo III period, represents the peak of their architectural ingenuity. These were not just shelters, they were high-rise stone cities suspended between the earth and the sky. Architectural marvels of the alcoves. The move to the cliffs required a total rethink of how to build. Space was limited by the shape of the cave, so they built vertically and compactly. Cliff Palace. The largest of these sites, Cliff Palace, contained over 150 rooms and 23 kivas. It was a masterpiece of urban planning, with living quarters, storage rooms, and ceremonial spaces, all tiered like a giant puzzle. T-shaped doors. One of the most iconic features of this era is the T-shaped doorway. These unique openings were wider at the top than the bottom. While their exact purpose is debated, some say they were for carrying wide loads, others say they were symbolic, they became a signature of Puebloan style. Sandstone masonry. They used double stone walls filled with rubble and plastered with mud. The overhanging cliff provided a natural roof, protecting the buildings from snow, rain, and the blistering sun. The vertical life, living on the edge. Life in the cliff dwellings was a daily feat of physical endurance. To reach their homes, the people had to be expert climbers. Hand and footholds. They carved small, shallow depressions into the near-vertical sandstone walls. Using only these tiny grips, they would climb hundreds of feet up and down the cliffs daily, often while carrying heavy loads of corn, water jars, or building materials on their backs. The commute. Their farms were actually located on top of the mesas above the dwellings. Every morning, the farmers would climb out of the canyons to tend to their crops, and every evening, they would descend back into the safety of the stone alcoves. Why the cliffs? The mystery of defense and spirit. The million-dollar question for archaeologists has always been, why did they move there? Building in a cliff is much harder than building on flat ground. Several theories exist. The defense theory. The late 1200s were a time of social unrest. Moving into the cliffs turned their cities into fortresses. A small group of people at the top could easily defend the narrow access points against any intruders. The climate theory. The cliff alcoves acted like a natural thermos. In the winter, the low sun hit the back of the cave, heating the stones. In the summer, the high sun was blocked by the overhang, keeping the city cool. The resource theory. By living in the alcoves, they saved every square inch of fertile mesa topsoil for farming. Water management in a drying land. During this period, the Southwest began to experience the beginning of a devastating great drought. The Ancestral Puebloans became master hydrologists. They built check dams to catch silt and moisture, and they constructed stone-lined reservoirs on the mesa tops, like Mummy Lake in Mesa Verde, to store precious rainwater. They also utilized seep springs, places where water naturally filtered through the porous sandstone and collected at the back of the cliff alcoves. In a land where water was life, they knew exactly how to find and keep every drop. Social life in the alcoves. Despite the cramped quarters, the culture was vibrant.
The plazas between the buildings were buzzing centers of activity. Women's work. In the shadows of the cliffs, women spent hours grinding corn on matatas. The rhythmic rub, scrub, scrub sound of stone on stone would have been the soundtrack of the village. Kivas in the cliffs. Even in these tight spaces, they prioritized their spiritual life. Kivas were built deep into the floors of the alcoves, ensuring that the connection to the ancestors was never broken, even when living high above the ground.
The worldview, life in balance. For the Ancestral Puebloans, life was not divided into sacred and secular. Everything, from the way a pot was painted to the way a field was planted, was a religious act. Their core philosophy was centered on duality and balance, the sky and the earth, the summer and the winter, the physical world and the spirit world. They believed that as long as they performed the correct rituals and lived in harmony with nature, the rain would fall and the corn would grow. The kiva, the heart of the community. The most important structure in any Puebloan village was the kiva. As the people moved into the cliffs, these circular, subterranean chambers became even more central to their identity. The sipapu. In the center of the kiva floor was a small, unassuming hole called the sipapu. This was the most sacred spot in the village. It represented the place of emergence, the portal through which the first humans climbed out of the dark underworld and into the sunlight world. The bench and pilasters. Inside the kiva, stone benches lined the walls where elders and priests would sit. Large stone pillars called pilasters supported the heavy timber roof, which also served as the village's main plaza. Secret societies. Most kiva ceremonies were private, held by specific societies responsible for different aspects of life, such as healing, hunting, or calling the rain. The art of clay, black on white mastery. While the men often focused on architecture and hunting, the women were the masters of the ceramic arts. By the 1200s, Puebloan pottery had reached a level of sophistication that is still world-renowned. The coil method. They did not use a potter's wheel. Instead, they rolled clay into long snakes or coils, stacked them, and smoothed the walls by hand. Geometric language. Their signature black-on-white style was more than just decoration. The intricate spirals represented the wind and migration. The zigzags represented lightning and water, and the hatched lines represented the falling rain. Every bowl was a prayer for survival in a drying land. A day in the life, the rhythm of the cliffs. What did a typical Tuesday look like in a cliff dwelling? Life was busy, social, and physically demanding. Dawn. The day began at sunrise. Men and older boys would climb the precarious hand and footholds to the mesa top to tend to the corn and bean fields. The morning grind. The most iconic sound in the village was the rhythmic scrub-scrub of the metate. Women spent several hours every day grinding dried corn into fine meal using a heavy stone slab. This was a social time where women talked, laughed, and sang together. Craft and construction. In the shade of the alcoves, others would be weaving sandals from yucca fibers, napping arrowheads from flint, or repairing stone walls with fresh mud mortar. The evening meal. As the sun set, the families would gather around small fires. They ate a diet of corn mush, beans, squash, and the occasional rabbit or turkey. Domesticated turkeys were kept in small pens within the cliff dwellings, used more for their feathers to make warm blankets than for meat. The turmoil of the spirit. Toward the end of the 13th century, the spiritual life of the Puebloans began to change. As the Great Drought deepened, the old rituals at Chaco and Mesa Verde seemed to stop working. Archaeologists have found evidence of new religious movements during this time. They began to build great kivas that could hold hundreds of people, suggesting a need for larger, more unified ceremonies. There was a sense of spiritual crisis, a feeling that the balance had been lost. This spiritual unrest, combined with the drying climate, set the stage for the most dramatic decision in their history: to leave their homes forever.
By the end of the 13th century, a heavy silence began to fall over the once bustling canyons of the American Southwest. The Great Drought, a merciless 30-year dry spell, had turned the fertile mesa tops into parched dust. The corn, which was the heartbeat of their society, refused to grow. The springs that had trickled through the sandstone for centuries slowed to a mere drip. The Ancestral Puebloans, a people who had survived in the desert for over a millennium, realized that their time in the Four Corners was coming to a close. The departure was not a panicked flight, but a solemn and organized migration. There is a haunting beauty in how they left. In many rooms, the people neatly stacked their grinding stones and sealed the doorways of their granaries with fresh mud and stone, as if they were tucking their homes into a long sleep. They left behind thousands of pieces of pottery and tools, carrying only what was essential: their children, their sacred items, and the precious seeds of corn that held their future. They began a massive journey south and southeast, following the pull of more reliable water sources. This great migration saw thousands of people trekking across hundreds of miles of rugged desert terrain. They were not just moving their homes, they were reinventing their society. They moved toward the Rio Grande Valley in New Mexico and the high mesas of Arizona. As they settled in these new lands, their architecture changed. They shifted from the heavy sandstone of the cliffs to adobe, sun-dried mud bricks that were better suited for the lower, hotter elevations. When Spanish explorers arrived in the 1500s, they were stunned to find these cities of mud thriving in the desert. They called the people pueblos, meaning villagers. Despite centuries of pressure from colonization, the Pueblo people did something extraordinary. They kept their culture, their languages, and their religion alive. They didn't disappear into history, they evolved. Today, the story of the Ancestral Puebloans is a living one. It is heard in the Tewa and Tiwa languages spoken in New Mexico and seen in the ancient ceremonies of the Hopi and Zuni. Taos Pueblo and Acoma, the Sky City, stand as some of the oldest continuously inhabited communities in North America. The empty, haunting windows of the cliff dwellings are not a tomb for a lost race, but a monument to a people who had the wisdom to move when the world changed, proving that the strength of a civilization lies not in its stones, but in its spirit.